Welcome again. Thank you for joining us today in our webinar, Assessing and Revamping Your Home Care Strategy Ahead of 2023. It's customary that this time of the year, many organizations enter into that strategic planning mode, trying to figure out how can we perform differently, better in the year to come. And for the home care industry, it's no different, right? Especially with all the changes that this industry has seen over the last decade and even more so over the last 5 years. So today we are really going to be trying to delve into some context as to how you can go about improving your strategy. We have some incredible speakers with us on this webinar. This webinar has been organized by the Anchor Group. And we have a quick slide here, a little bit about who the Anchor Group is. We are a strategic consulting firm, been working in the long-term care space, specifically with home care agencies for the last 7 years, but have a history of 13 years as a corporation. We do several services from corporate advisory to process reengineering, digital transformation, coaching, and marketing services. You can reach out to us after if you want to learn more about the Anchor suite of services. Today's event will cover 4 key areas. One of those areas is explore and understand the 7 P's of strategic planning. We'll be looking at talent and customer experience, critical to the success of any home care agency. And I always say there are only 2 variables in any organization. Everything else is static. People, internal, which are your workers, your external, your talent, and people, external, which are your customers. And if those groups of individuals are not treated, and if our strategies are not built with them in mind, then we are fighting a losing battle from the beginning. Understand the importance of risk management, very, very important. The home care sector is a highly regulated space. And so we will be talking a little bit about risk management and process improvement and digitization. And then finally, we'll spend the last 30 minutes of this session to look at innovative revenue models and operational models that you can utilize in your business. So for a few housekeeping, you will have the opportunity to ask questions. We will take the questions at the end of 1 or 2 questions at the end of each presenters. And then at the end, we'll have 30 minutes that we call our fireside chat. So if your questions aren't answered in the beginning, we will answer the questions during the fireside chat. And it is expected to be an interactive engagement between these many experts of many years, not just in home care, but in business and business management. So please put your questions in the chat box or in the QA box, question and answer box, and we will respond as we go along. And additionally, during the session, we will flip up a couple polls, and we'd love if you would answer those polling questions as we go through the exercise with you today. So again, thanks for joining, and we will forge ahead. I'm very excited to have 3 incredible speakers today. We have Andrea Brown, the CEO of AB Consulting. I'll give Andrea a few minutes just to kind of introduce herself and tell a little bit about who she is to kind of create the expectation for what is to come throughout this session. Andrea? And you're mute.
That is not who I am. I'm definitely not mute. So thanks, Kevin, for inviting me along with my other distinguished panelists. So I am Andrea Brown. I have been in the home care space for about 38 years now, wearing several different hats. My last 6 years, 6 going on 7, have been assisting organizations to remain compliant, to strategize and think ahead as we have navigated the multiple changes in the last 10 years. And it is my hope to continue to do so as we move through the next few years. And so I work with individuals, I work with organizations, I use coaching and consultation techniques to help organizations become their best at what they can do. And that's it for now, Kevin. I know we don't have a lot of time. I want to dig right in.
Thanks so much, Andrea. And then we have Mr. Thomas Cocozza. And Thomas, you can jump in, introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you, Kevin, and I appreciate you getting my last name correct. Not everyone does it first go, so I appreciate that. So I'm Tom Cocozza. I am the Director of Operations at VNS Health Personal Care. You may know us by, we used to be VNS NY, and Personal Care used to be Partners in Care. Those changes happened earlier this year as part of rebranding. Anyway, I've been with the organization for over 17 years, in a variety of roles. Working as an analyst, working as a project manager and an operations manager before in my current state as a director of operations. So in that role, I oversee all the home health aid services that we do for our CHAs, hospices, and MLTCs, as well as supporting all the back office things to help our operations run. Again, as Andrea said, I'm very excited to be here. I don't want to talk too much now because I want to talk more later. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And then we have Emina Poricanin. And Emina, you can jump in, introduce yourself.
Thanks, Kevin. And Tom, people often get my name wrong as well. So I'm also thrilled when someone gets it right like Kevin did. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with this esteemed panel. As Andrea said, I look forward to speaking with you. I think I'm known to most of you. I am in the home care industry as the outsourced legal officer for many, many organizations across New York State on all matters, LICSA, CHA, and FI, sometimes MLTCs as well. And I'll be speaking about various compliance issues that could impact the bottom line as you start planning for the 2023 calendar year.
Thank you very much. So we're going to jump in, Emina. So value-based care model is here to stay, whether you like it or not, right? As a conversation about health equity, access, sustainability fire up, healthcare organization, home care organizations continually have to pivot and also to adapt to the change in regulation and also the competition. We have seen efforts from New York State to contract the industry in the last 5 years. And we've seen it through the lens of the MLTC and the MCOs who have reduced the number of contractors or vendors rather that they have working with them and working in the homes. These MLTCs and MCOs are looking for the best agencies to work with, period. And best, many MLTC have defined best for themselves differently, but they're all looking for the best sets of agencies to work with. And a great agency or the agency of the future is an agency that has an integrative approach to care. And that could be through partnerships, which Thomas will talk a little bit about, or it could be through just streamlining your systems better, right? Or acquiring companies, right? Because that's an option. And we'll talk a little bit about that later on in the fireside chat. So the reality is to reduce health disparity, to create the types of waves in your organization, you will definitely have to develop strategies that are sound. I wrote a book a couple of years ago. It's called All You Can Eat. And I have a quote in the book. It says, a business strategy is a roadmap that links a company to its destination. The strategies relies on both foresight and goals and encapsulates the company's vision and mission. The more specific, measurable, timely, and realistic these goals are and these strategic frameworks are, the greater your chance of winning. And you could get all you can eat on Amazon. We have a principle at the Anchor Group when it comes out to strategic planning, and it's a 7P strategic planning model, where at the heart of strategy is connecting with an organization plan. Right? What is your goal? What are your goals? What is it that you want? Where is it you want to go? What customers do you want to reach, right? So you're setting those goals, you're setting those timelines, but defining clearly the services and the products that you're selling. Oftentimes, we don't know the value construct around our products and services. What is different about your agency? What is it that will make an MLTC want to keep you as a vendor, or a hospital system want to partner with you for post-acute care, or a third-party relationship wants to work with you to help you to improve your customer engagement? What is special about your company? What is it that you're offering? And companies have to spend the time to understand their products and understand those products and services in the context of your customers. And I know many home care agencies serve disabled individuals, people over the age of 65. And then you have the short-term care that comes in based upon emergent needs. The next thing that we look on and we believe is very, very big, as you think about your strategic plan, you have to map out those processes, right? What are your key processes around customer, and what are your key processes around talent? Because ultimately, that's what's most important, right? If you can't make work easier for your talent, and if you can't make life better for your customers, then why are you in business? And so your strategic processes should be geared to enable you to strengthen customer experiences, strengthen talent experience, and at the same time in a very compliant way. And hence the reason we have Andrea, Emina, and Thomas on today, because they're going to be touching on each of those elements through this conversation. People, talent, very, very important. Do you know who your talent is? Do you know who your employees, where is it that they want to go? What is it that they want to be when they grow up? And it seems like a simple question. And I was having a conversation last night with a client, and one person expressed a frustration, and they were looking to leave the organization. And in some ways, people might feel that when people leave your organization, it's because they don't want to be there anymore. Sometimes they really want to be there, but you don't have a proper people culture that keep them there. So even though they want to be there, you don't have the goods to keep them there. And so building strategy will require you to kind of understand, how is it that I'm going to build the goods for my people, right? Partnerships. Many of us cannot grow without partnerships. No organization can grow without partnerships. Some are bigger, some need less relationships, right? But at the end of the day, partnerships have to be a big part of your strategic plan. Precision of performance. How are you tracking your plan? What are the KPIs that you're going to be establishing as a part of the strategic planning process? So when you get to 6 months, 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, you can say, oh, I've achieved or not achieved. If you don't create those performance measurements during the strategic planning process, what are you pivoting against? What are you growing against, right? And then once you've established those performance metrics, the next step is, as you go along the journey, you're going to see that whatever you thought never made sense. Remember, a strategy is just a bridge to the goal. Sometimes you have to shift. You have to create another bridge. You have to create a ladder on the bridge to get to another point on the bridge, or you got to change the bridge altogether. And so that's what pivoting means. Pivoting means your ability to understand where is it that you want to go and to adjust incrementally to get there as quickly and as efficiently with less cost as possible. And I was talking to somebody yesterday, a potential new client, and I was saying to him, that you've done acquisitions before? And he said, yes. And I gave him a copy of my book, and in the back, there's a due diligence checklist. And he was like, I don't know if I did it right. Oftentimes, we've done it before, and we'll say, we've been there, done that. The question is, are you doing it right? And establishing a strong strategic plan, understanding the principle based upon the ANSOF model, where are you driving a penetration strategy? Are you driving a product development strategy? Which means that you're increasing products with your existing customers, or you're going into new market, a market development strategy, or you're just going to diversify. You're going to go new product, new markets. Whichever way that you determine that you're going to go, you have to take a proper strategic approach to that process to ensure that you can drive a market-ready strategy that is going to be aligned with your growth and your efficiency goals. And ultimately, it will also be compliant, because a lot of people play games. And guess what? Sometimes we win at the game, but you don't want to build a business and then it get teared down because you're not compliant, right? So let's seek to be compliant. And the last thing before I hand it over to Andrea is your strategy need to be built from a value-based lens. And what does value-based lens mean? It means that you create a plan, you are measuring the plan continuously, you are learning continuously, and you are refreshing timely. Refreshing 6 months after the fact is not good enough. Refreshing a year later is not good enough, right? I know in hindsight, we always say, oh, hindsight is 2020 vision, but maybe we could get that 2020 vision earlier if we were tracking, right? And so the idea behind value-based from the anchors lens is that value-based connects to building systems, building framework, and then tracking those systems and framework against your established KPIs and adjusting timely. And we'll be talking a little bit about talent experience, client experience. But our value-based assessment, which is a real assessment, a real tool that businesses can actually connect with, that gives you an ability to, in an hour, really establish, are you operating from a value-based lens, or are you operating just purely from the old model? And the old model, it worked, but it worked then. We're in a new era. So let's join that band of organizations that are providing services in the right place, in the right time, with the right person, and with the right level of sensibility. I'm going to hand over to Andrea now, as she will talk a little bit about her section, customer experience. Before I jump there though, we have a quick poll, 2 questions that we'd love if you answer. We'll give you 30 seconds to answer those questions. So this is the first question. You can answer, you have 30 seconds to answer, and then we will turn over to Andrea. So 15 seconds. Okay, so we are going to end this poll, and we could share the result. So 60% of the individuals say they're in progress. Nobody has completed. 5 said no, and 7%, which is 1, says we do not create a plan. So let's go to the next polling question. So let me stop sharing result. I go to the next question quickly, launch it. So we have one other question. Do you need help with your strategic planning process? So in a second, I'm gonna close the poll. All right, so I'm gonna end the poll now and share the result. 27% says yes, 33% says maybe, and 6% says no. All right, so Andrea, the floor is yours.
Okay.
For you to jump in and in this exciting component.
Thanks, Kevin. All right, let's jump right in and move to our first slide. So as you clearly stated and obviously correctly stated, we can't do any of these things if we don't have a strategic approach. And strategy is the role of leadership. Leadership is responsible for establishing strategy, for defining and communicating the agency's goals, and for messaging those goals. And I think sometimes there's a disconnect within organizations where leadership at the leadership table will say, this is what we want and this is what we're going to do. But then in our day-to-day management and our walk around with staff, the message looks different. So if we're taking the time to kind of pull back a little bit and say, what's our clear strategy going to be for 2023? The first thing is we really do need to be clear on what our goals are. And my discussion points here today are focusing on the client experience. And so where in your list of goals is the client experience? You know, where in your list of goals is that? And so I think we really have to be clear. Are we saying it? Is it a bullet point? Or then do we put resources behind it, right? So anything that we create as a goal, we then need to come up with some key objectives. And to Kevin's point, everything is measurable. So if client experience is a primary goal for us, what are the objectives that we're going to look at and work with to get us to that point of improving our client experience? And then as leadership, part of your role is going to be to provide the appropriate resources, whether it be training, whether it be folks to work with your staff, whatever it needs, whether it be more staff. You know, we need to make sure that folks have the right resources to be able to meet the objectives that you're establishing. And much like Kevin, I am about monitoring performance. You cannot fix what you do not track. It's just that simple. So we've got to come up with ways to monitor our performance, and ultimately we have to hold our staff accountable. There are no sacred cows. Everybody needs to, and folks, otherwise, you know, we talk about cultures and the creation of cultures. If we're not, we have to be careful that what we say we want as our culture is what we actually create with our actions and our day-to-day activities. So holding our staff accountable is actually key as part of leadership. Next slide, please. So when I talk and think about the client experience, I should say reverse, think and then talk about the client experience, there are two key factors that I think we need to focus on. The clinical outcomes. I am a nurse, so I can't ever leave that hat at home. Clinical outcomes, which translates often into how are they actually physically feeling, but not just physically, emotionally as well, psychologically, right? And the other big thing is the client satisfaction. How do they actually feel about the services or the care, the services we provide and the care that they're receiving? Because they could be two different things there, right? The services we provide and the care that they're receiving. So we need to really kind of drill down, and obviously in this discussion, we won't have time to go into all of those details, but we'll start to look at just a few thoughts. I want to just, have folks think a little bit about what this might actually translate into. Next slide. So clinical outcomes. Clinical outcomes, these are defined by our standards of care or practice guidelines. These are things that, clinicians are taught in school. And when you start with an organization and they have protocols in place, clinical protocols. These are the things that we follow. So if a person has a particular disease process, as an example, clinically, these are going to be the interventions that we're going to do based on standards of care, acceptable standards of care. But they're also defined by our peers, right? So as Kevin correctly stated, quality is defined by each MLTC, meaning what they're looking for may vary. Now, we all know what the state's kind of big 3 or big 4 or whatever are, or actually more than that, quite frankly. But my point is, each MLTC picks a few things that are important to them. And so you have to look at the people you do business with and what's important to those people. That's really key. When we talk about partnerships, we obviously want to get something out of a partnership, but we also have to give something for it to be an effective partnership. So what is it that our peers need? What's important to MLTC A versus MLTC B? And you may find that you have a lot of different things to measure, or you may find that there's incredible overlap if you really are looking and translating what they're asking you for. And the clinical outcomes that we receive or patients experience depend on the patient. Where are they in this process? Whenever a new client comes on board within an organization, it's important for us to understand what is it that they're looking for from this care? Who is it that's in their world? Do they have an effective support system? If not, how are we going to address this? We can no longer say we're here to provide the aid and just kind of close our minds and our eyes to everything else, because those things will impact the client's ability to achieve positive clinical outcomes, right? And so the support system, the client physically, Kevin, you talked about some of the disparities. And so we also need to think about how that translates for each of our patients, access to care, access, the economic standing, all of these different things really, play an incredible role. We live in New York State. We often, folks don't think about seeing things like food deserts in the city, but there are food deserts in the city in certain communities. So really thinking about, if I'm caring for clients in a particular neighborhood and the doctor has offered or ordered, I should say, this therapeutic diet, how realistic is it that that person is actually going to be able to get all of those things, right? So that's the definition or how our clinical outcomes are defined. What can we do to impact this? Or assessment, when our nurses or any other staff going in or doing assessments, the quality of the data that they collect is key. It's got to be comprehensive. It's got to be thorough. It's got to be accurate. And it's got to be accessible to other members of the care team. Really, really key. And accessible timely. Many of us are still using paper, or well, I won't even go down that road. But if it's paper, you know that the paperwork gets into the office a week or 2 weeks later if nurses are doing assessment. By then, how many aides have we had in the home? Who's really monitoring that plan of care closely to make sure that the aides are doing what it is that patients need? And we do know that the first couple of weeks of service set the tone for the rest of the delivery of care, right? What are the appropriate interventions by the care team? And this is, folks who know me know this is a personal pet peeve of mine. Care plans that just have check, check, tick, tick. Ugh. Aides need direction, they need clarity, they need parameters. All of these things have to be really provided very clearly. And then we have half a chance of getting it right, right? Because the aides, they do have good skills. We train them well, we in-service them constantly, but they need to be able to know exactly what it is that we need. And we should not put them in situations where there's lack of clarity and then they are in a position to make decisions that they shouldn't be. Like I said, that access to real-time data about care delivery, as well as the client status, is key. Sometimes we have them very separate. So coordination knows that Mrs. Jones didn't get an aid today. Meanwhile, the clinician knows Mrs. Jones really is having a bit of a tough time and shouldn't be left alone. And because that information about the service delivery is not necessarily shared with a clinical team, we may have a situation where Mrs. Jones may be expressing or experiencing depression of some kind, which may impact other factors in the home. So we really need to think about how we are allowing for that transfer of information to all of the relevant members of the team. And ultimately, we have to monitor performance, and we have to know how our patients are doing. And we have to find a way to make them not just at the 6 months check-in. Okay, next slide. Client experience. Well, this is impacted by every person who comes in contact with your client from the time that they're a prospect all the way through to you onboard them. So during the intake process, the assessment process with your clinical team, the assignment process with our coordinations. And because we're human and because we're in a people business, we have problems occasionally. I'd like to say we're never going to have a problem. That is not realistic. I'm very practical. How do we respond to those problems? Do we have systems in place and processes to make sure that there is consistency amongst the way that we respond to issues, problems, or concerns in a timely manner? Do we have processes in place to make sure we go back and close the loops? Because it's one thing to initiate an investigation. It's another thing to come back and make sure that that investigation was closed, that the concern was properly addressed or resolved, and that the person was actually happy with the resolution, right? So let's think about how we can improve that experience. Understanding what's important to our client, being transparent about our service delivery process. And then the other key point is we all, meaning all members of the care team, have to speak with the same voice. So we can't allow ourselves to be compartmentalized when we talk to our clients, because our clients deal with one entity, meaning the organization. They don't necessarily care that it's the coordinator that I'm speaking to as opposed to the nurse or the aide themselves. They don't want, and we should not allow for that level of silo activity within our organizations. We need to be speaking with one voice. We need to be responding to issues and concerns with one method. And I think if we can do some of these things, we'll have a better handle on creating a positive client experience. So for me, and the big takeaways here, use data. I'm right here with you, Kevin. Data. We have to collect the right data, right? That's the first thing, collect the right data. And don't collect what you're not going to use. That's just work. That's extra work for somebody because it sounded like a good idea at the time. And I see that a lot. People are collecting stuff. I go, why are you doing that? Well, 2 DPSs ago, they thought we should be doing it this way. Okay, well, that was 2 DPSs ago. You got to look forward, not backward, right? So collect the right data, make sure that we are using data to improve our processes. We need to look and see where the holes are, and the data will help us to find those holes. And then we want to train our staff, train, and hold them accountable at all times. And then lastly, monitor our performance and communicate the performance to all members of the team. I'm doing some training and I'm talking to folks. It's so interesting to me to see how siloed, how information that is critical to everyone is kept at certain levels of the organization and is not trickling down. It's very important for the team to know how they're doing. They work very hard every single day, and that's your aides, that's your coordinators, that's everybody below the C-suite, quite frankly. How are they doing, right? And so when we talk about, and that impacts how the team performs. So this is my place where I'm going to give a nice segue to Thomas, who's going to talk about how we build and maintain and do all those wonderful things with our home care teams.
Definitely, Andrea, I think this is a very, very good segue. But before you run away, there's one question. With a strained workforce throughout the industry, it is understandable the spirit might not always be high and attitudes might lean toward indifference. Considering this, how can we ensure the client experience is kept at a satisfactory level?
Well, that's an interesting question. And I thought, so here's the thing. There's never been a perfect time in home care. And we've always had issues where some folks handle things better than others. I think what we have to do first, and I'm going to answer this from two approaches. What's leadership's role? Leadership also has to provide resources for us to congratulate folks when they're doing well, for us to recognize the value of the work that's being done. And when things get tighter, instead of us getting angrier and kind of looking to displace that negative energy, we've got to find folks who are doing a great job and hold them up as examples of how do we want things to be done. And I've seen that, now, when you talk about, say, caregiver recognition programs, there's some mixed outcomes, right? Both in literature and as well as in actual my life experience. But I still think there's a place for recognition programs. I think there's a way, or places and ways for us to incentivize workers who go above and beyond. But not just, what we need to do is communicate that those workers are getting these incentives or getting that recognition. And a lot of organizations don't have, we're dealing with a remote workforce, right? So this is one of the biggest remote workforces before the rest of us became remote. So we don't have the bulletin boards like organizations that where folks come into the room and you can post this and post that. How are we pushing content and information out to our workers? How are we doing that? How do we share the good stories? Because there are plenty, as many issues as we have with indifference and negative attitudes, we can counter that with great stories. So we need to celebrate those great stories. We need to incentivize those people who are doing well. And we need to recognize and those values that we deem to be the highest and what we want all of our staff to exude.
Thanks much, Andrew. So pretty interesting, and I won't get into, we'll save the discussion for later. But Thomas, you can jump in and really talk about the segue that Andrea gave to you and the previous question around talent and how talent essentially drives customer experience. Thomas?
Sure, thank you. And Andrea couldn't have, I think, set me up better if we had pre-planned that, so I appreciate that. So yeah, here is the official: developing a strong people culture and leveraging stakeholder relationships to support the delivery of consistent quality service, right? That's the official title, but let me get into what we're going to talk about. So to me, the single most important commodity in our business is our workforce, right? The competition and cost to recruit that workforce now is larger than it ever was before, but the bellwether of success for any organization in home care is having a happy, productive, and engaged caregiver pool, right? Having that directly leads to having more satisfied clients who have better health outcomes. So the challenge before us is, how do you address the need for recruiting and retaining that workforce without having the capability to offer the most competitive of salaries? So the answer in brief is that you must find ways to invest in that workforce. Now, you may be saying to yourself, that's easier said than done, especially in the difficult financial times some of us are dealing with, and you may be right in that. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do, but it is a necessary one. And while the traditional way to attack that idea is to address it in starting salaries and in raises, innovative companies are finding alternative ways of investing in that workforce. So we go to the next slide. Okay, so there's 3 keys for investment in your workforce, right? That you can use it to build that rapport with your staff. And those keys are communication, connection, and recognition. And we'll go into them all in more detail. Next slide. So communication is the baseline for investment in your workforce. Because our caregivers are out in the field, sometimes without company-issued devices, communication to them can be spotty and more difficult than communication to our in-office staff. We tend to focus on what they need to know from our point of view, or more selfishly put, what we need from them, right? Now, there's nothing inherently wrong in that approach, but I'd suggest take it a step further. Include them in all communications that would go out to your entire in-office team. Keep them abreast of what's going on in the company, even if it doesn't directly apply to them at the moment. If you're celebrating that you hit a third quarter goal, let them know that their hard work was part of that success. You hired a new manager in HR, let your field staff know who they may have to meet with the next time they have a difficult situation. Doing this keeps them engaged in your company and helps them feel like valued employees. In the past, we've struggled on the best way to try and do this. Telephone outreach, mass mailings, they're inefficient, they're time consuming, but as the years have advanced, so have our options. Nowadays, all of our tech partners, especially on the scheduling side, have mobile applications for field worker use. These applications will have some sort of messaging ability. We suggest take advantage of that. And now you have communications with your staff through an application that you want them to use for other business reasons. That drives utilization, that drives engagement, right? One thing I'll say, and I'll kind of echo a point made earlier, it's important that these company-wide communications are singular in style and approach. Having scattershot messages and content and tone, letting everybody have the ability to message everybody, it creates different stylistic choices, it creates different vernacular, and it creates confusion, right? You want these messages to be from your organization. You want this to be consistent. You also want individual communication, but that's kind of a different thing. These company-wide communications, right? Consistency is key. So next slide. Right? When you're talking about those personal communications, that's what we're really talking about, making a connection. It's the next step of focus, right? It's making the relationship that you have with your caregiver, your field worker, a personal one. Now, it can be done on a company-wide level with those communications, instead of being what the company wants from you, but what the aide wants from the company, right? Focusing on what the worker needs, what they want. But these things are more potent when those connections are made person to person. Having your scheduling coordinators, your nurse supervisors, taking the time to know their staff individually, that's time well spent. We're still dealing with the after effects of separations required during the pandemic. Personal connections have a greater impact now than they ever had. A simple call on a birthday or making a reminder note about an upcoming event in a worker's life that they mentioned and then checking in on it, or taking some time when someone comes back from a vacation to ask about that vacation and how it went before you offer them a new case, right? That helps our field staff feel seen as colleagues and people instead of interchangeable cogs in a machine. Building those personal relationships makes the difference in staff retention, especially when competition for workers is so high. It's said that workers don't leave jobs, they leave managers, but workers stay in jobs because of work relationships as well. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So the third key is recognition, which is essential. Now, you may not be in a position to offer a salary above market in order to recruit new workers, but it's worth the expense to find ways to recognize the performance of your field staff and incentivize them accordingly. If you're trying to increase your census of a certain type of case or cases in a certain region, offer a bonus for working and completing those types of cases. If you're trying to develop a change in behavior in your entire workforce, incentivize those who are early adopters. If you're trying to grow your workforce, offer incentives for referrals of new staff and for hours worked by new recruits. Circling back to the first two elements of the strategy, you have to communicate these initiatives and utilize the personal relationships you're developing to pinpoint this communication. Make sure your workforce is aware that you're making the effort to reward them for the hard and good work that they do and for the goals that they're helping the company achieve. Let them know they're as essential to achieving the company's goals as anyone else who works there in any role. The cost expenditure is small compared to your overall salary expenses, and it pays dividends beyond the positive behavior of that one caregiver. What you're doing is you're building a culture and a reputation at your organization that you're someone who values caregivers, and that's going to echo down. Next slide. So talking about these concepts and these philosophies is one thing. Let me give you some examples of how we're putting them in action at VNS Health Personal Care, right? So one thing, when the pandemic hit, we were all stuck with how we were going to supplement our workforce. We're dealing with regulations regarding face-to-face contact and fear from potential caregivers about being around large groups of people. So VNS Health Personal Care was the first in the state to do online certification of home health aides. And we spearheaded the advocacy of that initiative to the Department of Health when everything shut down. So it's really about knowing what your workforce wants and needs, and then engaging with the people at the state level to get that done. Right? Then we partner with our technology vendors to have platforms for that virtual training, which transitioned not only to certification of our HHA, but virtual trainings for in-services as well. That made it more convenient, quicker, and safer for our staff to get the trainings that they need to do the job, right? So it's taking what we have, or what we need to have because of thing, and then figuring out a way to flip that and to make it more convenient on a go-forward basis. So another thing is that we set up regular calls for our caregiver population to offer them the opportunity to have their voices and concerns heard directly. One call that we have is with the leadership of the organization. They have direct access where they can hear directly from us about what's going on, what we're looking to do, what we're looking to do with them, and we can hear directly from them about their concerns, their questions, and address them. This is a great way to strengthen bonds with our workforce, to show support for the staff, and to stay plugged in. Secondly, what we also do is emotional support calls set up weekly to help our field staff deal with the difficulties of the job. Again, this started during the pandemic, but it had such a great impact on our staff that we kept them going forward, right? And this is something that it's not only are we showing our staff, are we kind of modeling our behavior of like being emotionally available and being somebody who's going to support you. This is what we want you to do for your clients. But it also helps kind of build their bonds with each other because they get to share with each other common experiences and they know that they're not alone. We've also used technology that we had in place to make changes in how we operate. We're piloting an initiative with Care Connect, a company that we use that not only provides those online trainings that I talked about earlier, but they do case placement on that application. They're using their own staff and technology to take away some of the most difficult parts of what our schedulers do, the placing and replacing of cases, to allow our scheduling team to be more HHA supervisors, to guide, coach, and work with our staff to make them better at what they do, and to increase the satisfaction and outcomes of clients working with that staff. So instead of our staff taking most of their time trying to place that last minute call off, they have the time to address that person who called off last minute to explain why that's a problem and how that impacts the client, the agency, and everyone, rather than spending that time desperately trying to find someone to fill that shift, right? Finally, we're working to roll out employee surveys, long done for internal office staff, to our field staff as well. And the key to this initiative is not the survey of the HHA population. That's easy to do. It's the follow through, and created dedicated action plans that address HHA needs. We were able to see a turnaround in 1 year based on the initiatives that we've talked about earlier, both in the response rate to this survey from 18% a year ago to 51% a couple of months ago, as well as the favorability scores when rating employer satisfaction. Our staff scored double digits above the national average for employee satisfaction in home care agencies. And that's a direct result of what we've done to give them support and to hear their voice and to act on that. So next slide. Just to conclude it all up, when you focus on these concepts as key tenets of workforce management, you're building that culture of valuing caregivers. You're modeling the behavior of communication and respect and care that you want your caregivers to demonstrate in the home. You're making people feel like they're part of an organization that values them for who they are, not how many shifts they can fill. That is the most powerful tool in recruitment and retention of caregivers. If your workforce feels valued and recognized, they're going to be recruiters for you in a way that no HR recruiter can be. They're going to feel incentivized and empowered, not to represent your company, but their company. And that's as powerful a tool as you can ask to have nowadays. Thank you very much. That's what I got.
Thank you very much, Thomas, not to represent your company, but their company. And to your point today, as I pull the poll up for the last two activities, to your point, the caregivers don't feel like they're part of the agencies. And as a result, they are not committed at the level that we'd want them to be committed. We have a polling question up. Do you have a customer experience program? And so if you could answer that question while we flip to the other question around talent experience. Give you 5 more seconds to answer this poll. Okay, we will end the poll there, and then we will pull up the next one, which is, have you created a talent experience program? I think one of the biggest thing is oftentimes organizations do not understand that just thinking about it is not good enough. It's doing it, right? Just do it, according to Nike. And Andrea touched on that a lot in her presentation, that you can't just have goals without creating the resource network and the systems to make those goals move forward, and putting the right people in place to champion those goals through your strategy. So definitely great engagement there. And we'll leave some of the questions. I see a few questions, but we'll leave it until the fireside chat of the program. So now I want to kind of invite our next presenter, which is Ms. Emina. Emina, see your time.
Thanks, Kevin. Hi, everyone. And you can move to the first slide as well. I'm going to go through this a little bit quickly because I understand that we're short on time. And luckily, I planned for that. So you are all aware that there are proposed corporate compliance requirements that are currently being proposed at OMIG's level. There is a lot of confusion that I hear from clients when I inform them that they are supposed to have a corporate compliance plan in place already. But what does that really mean? Because a lot of people, even if they know and have heard of it, don't know what it actually means. It basically means Medicaid corporate compliance and billing integrity. There have to be processes in place. There have to be written policies in place as well. But the policies are secondary. The procedures are even more important. Those policies and procedures have to be in place to ensure that someone is monitoring, checking, and self-auditing to make sure that you are not billing the state for more than you are entitled to bill. Every single unit of care that you provide comes with conditions, right? Conditions that have to be met before you are entitled to bill for that money or keep that money if it is paid. So Medicaid corporate compliance and billing integrity is a big issue that will become even bigger in 2023 as OMIG finalizes their proposed regulations. The other major the other major challenge that faces home care agencies on the compliance front has to do with clinical compliance and best practices when it comes to patient care. You know, there are definitely those providers out there who operate as a staffing agency. They only are concerned about getting a live breathing body out to the patient's home, and there's really no oversight over the patient. So that patient facing, what I refer to as the clinical and Andrea side of things, often gets neglected. And there are definitely regulations that govern what LICSAs and other home care-based providers are supposed to do when it comes to those clinical matters. But then there are also just common sense best practices that if they are not followed, the agency can be sued under negligence principles. So even though technically you are not required to do XYZ, if you fail to do it and the patient is injured or somehow the quality of life is diminished, you will be sued. So those are another ongoing challenge that I see home care agencies struggling with into 2023. And then labor and personnel compliance, a topic that's near and dear to my heart that I spend a lot of time working on. There's never a shortage of issues. We've heard a lot about staffing shortages, but there are quite a lot of personnel in this space that cause problems, that sue for harassment, discrimination, wage and hour violations, inequity of some sort. So there are all sorts of personnel surrounding compliance issues and just enforcement. So these also happen to be the biggest risk in compliance areas that impact the bottom line, because number one, you're going to need to have people who oversee these areas. And then two, if you are accused as a provider of not doing them correctly, you're going to need to retain very expensive legal counsel to get you through that storm. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about tackling compliance. Well, the compliance has to be part of the organization's culture and fabric, right? Initially, everyone needs to understand what these things mean. What are these terms and how do you implement them? And again, there is some fundamental misunderstanding and lack of awareness of how this all ties into the overall operations. Staff training and engagement is critical at the time of hire and at least once a year. That is the actual mandate as far as corporate compliance plans are concerned, but it should be the minimum that everyone is striving to achieve as well. Compliance needs to be present in the daily workings of employees, and they need to understand the relationship between their specific positions and compliance. You as the operators need to be able to, or managers, right, or department heads need to be able to make that connection for the employee, at least initially, until they get there, until they understand. You need to be able to explain how their department and what they do ties into the overall compliance of the organization and what the risk areas are in their department. An HR department is going to have different compliance issues than billing or collections, right? So each of them is dealing with compliance, but in a slightly different way. And then there needs to be ongoing communication to reinforce these primary basic rules. And then executive level internal audits to self-assess at least once a year, right? There has to be a compliance officer kind of overseeing all of this, but then on an annual basis, there needs to be a more full-blown review of how are we doing? Let's check in and let's see how we are doing from last year. Have we put processes in place to actually measure this and analyze our progress and whether we did what we said we're going to do when we put this in place? Next slide, please. Overcoming challenges. Well, we've heard a lot about the challenges that you have, and those are not a secret. As Andrea said, though, there has always been some sort of a cloud over home care. Unlike other healthcare providers, home care continuously has to prove itself to the legislature and justify its existence. So, the status, the constant of home care is change and challenge. So I don't describe this as anything new. It is unfortunately something that's the present. Oh, well, let's wait to get those slides back. There we go. Thanks. What I would say, though, because I do know that a lot of folks are discouraged about what's happening, is that the cost of non-compliance and errors is significant. So it's not one of those things that can be brushed off to the side. Everything you've heard today has to be part of the ongoing operations and your day-to-day, right? It can't be phase two. Let's tackle this thing and then put compliance into phase two. No, compliance has to be on a parallel track with customer service, with clinical compliance, with staff recruitment and retention, all of that. They just have to operate in sync. Management understands that the cost of non-compliance is significant because management is usually the one that has to go in and testify and produce information in response to a subpoena or to a government demand or to a lawsuit. But the next step is, again, to make sure that the department level folks also march to the same beat. And so management must ensure that everybody in their organization understands compliance, how that plays into what they do, and that they are actually executing and following up on that. I do recommend integrating lessons and little tidbits into the day-to-day, right? On the last slide, I talked about education and awareness, but putting posters throughout the office with compliance-related principles or reminders, emails and weekly newsletters are also a good idea. If the company has an intranet, when people are logging in for the day or putting in their PTO request, having a little reminder of some principle, maybe just a hotline, like reminding them that this is the compliance hotline that you should use. Those are all reinforcing the spirit and culture of compliance, okay? Games and raffles, if the organization wanted to make this fun and a little bit more hands-on, those are a way that management can get buy-in from their staff to get really engaged on these topics. And go next, if there is one. Okay. So I was asked to talk about emerging laws, regulations, and then I added other pressures. So even though something might not be proposed or in the pipeline, it is nonetheless a reality that you have to deal with. So that's what this slide addresses. Medicaid integrity and active affirmative monitoring for fraud, waste, and abuse. I want to emphasize that this is going to continue being a hot topic. The plans are under significant pressure. There are proposals to eliminate managed care that didn't pass last year, but I do expect, given some of the budgetary constraints, that there will be new attempts to eliminate managed care. And so managed care is trying to prove itself to the state, and they have been and will continue to play more of this regulator role. They are the intermediary between New York State and the provider. So they are there as the watchdog in many respects, making sure that the providers are complying with the law. And they have the right to ask providers to do more than what the law requires. So even though the regulations, require a certain level of record keeping, the plan can require more. And I see that a lot in the CDPAP context. So doing the minimum required by law is not going to be necessarily acceptable. Agencies should adopt this attitude of going above and beyond and doing more, because they will be called to that task at the very least by the plans. The other challenge, regulation, however we want to call it, is consolidation. Consolidation and this pressure to do more with less will continue. We have seen that hospitals and institutionalized settings cannot continue, they cannot discharge people at the fast enough pace. They don't have enough staff themselves. And so they're looking to discharge, but they can't discharge. Providers can't take in the community these patients because they don't have the staff. Nonetheless, I do expect that attempts by the state to consolidate LICSAs and FIs will continue, and there will be an expectation to do a lot more with less, basically, because there will be no federal bailout of home care as we've seen over the pandemic. The emphasis on enforcement will continue, but enforcement is not consistent. And it takes a long time, and it can sometimes be politically motivated rather than based on the merits. Nonetheless, providers need to be aware that they can be attacked by the OIG, by the Department of Labor, by the Attorney General. There are all of these government bodies that have a right to come in and ask you to prove that you've been running your business in a compliant fashion. And then workforce shortages and the rise of the worker and their rights, right? We have a much more educated workforce these days. We have an informed workforce. It doesn't matter that they were not US born. Information is getting to the workers. There are various advocacy groups who are helping them get that information. We've seen all of these union activities at Starbucks and Amazon, some successful, some not. So employees are better informed. They demand more, and it is beneficial to you, not only because you need to staff a case, and so you need that live, breathing, qualified worker there, but it is beneficial to you to do all of these things that Tom and Andrea and Kevin talked about, because it ensures you can provide the service. You are not constantly hiring and retraining people, and you are not having to deal with government audits and investigations and lawsuits. If you have qualified people to begin with, a lot of problems can be avoided down the line. So thank you very much. I hope I said that pretty efficiently. Oh, I did go over time. I apologize, but I hope it was
No,
helpful.
that's fine. I think it was necessary that you got through to the important part of compliance, because as you said, that oftentimes we look on compliance from the vantage point of a back burner, while in a lot of ways compliance can be integral to supporting some of the customer experience and talent experience that we spoke about earlier, but some of it is like mandatory, right? And then some of it is that you add on to find the value in improving the quality of care for your clients. I have another poll up here for need assistance with compliance program. You can quickly respond to that poll if you need assistance with compliance program. Give you another 5 seconds. All right, so I'm gonna end this poll now, and 78% of the persons don't need assistance, and about 22% could do with some assistance when it comes on to compliance programs. I want to spend the next couple of minutes, next like 5 minutes, just to wrap it all together in terms of creating that strategic culture that your organization or sound strategic plan. At Anchor, we have what we call the lead methodology, which looks at problem priority, prioritizing those problems, set up the right parameters, and setting up plan solution, designing plan solutions. As we think about our strategic plan, there's a lot to cover, right? And the easiest way that we found that an organization should be thinking about their strategic plan is obviously from the vantage point of, I want to make more in terms of revenue, right? Because we are in this business, it's a business, whether we are a for-profit agency or not-for-profit agency, to make revenue, right? And so you kind of ask yourself the question, revenue is at the top, and then you have your cost in the middle, and you have your profit slash surplus at the bottom. And you ask yourself the question, how is it that I increase revenue? And we'll talk a little bit about those new revenue models and operation models later on, but that has to be the center. And a big part of revenue is customer, right? Customer drives revenue, right? Customer or price. But at the end of the day, you don't control the price. The price gets negotiated by the MLTC, and the MLTC gives you a rate, and many agencies don't have the ability to fight the price, right? So you have to essentially ensure that the customers' price times quantity is equal to revenue, and the utilization of the customer authorization is optimal, right? Because if that's not optimal, then you're gonna have less revenue, and your cost may not go down at the same level as your revenue go down. So you look on your income statement and you're like, oh my God, we're close to a loss this year. Or you have months where cash flow is so tight and you can't cover your expenses because your revenue is shrinking. And that revenue is shrinking for many reasons. And so an organization that is pushing to build a strategic plan have to kind of context that strategic plan around revenue and then drill down, right? So the customers will be connected to your programs or your services that you're providing, right? And then how is it that you execute those services in the most efficient way possible with the less greater value, less cost, right? So that's reducing waste. So when you have extreme overtime, then that's a problem. When you have authorization that are 70% staff, that's a problem. Or when you have costs in your organization that you are not maximizing the value of, in terms of you have talented employees that you never truly maximize their value because you don't know what work they're doing. So as you think about your strategic planning process this year, it's going to be very, very important that you really think about revenue and think about efficiently maintaining that revenue. Data, all right? So a lot that we're talking about today is really centered around the conversation of data. You can't pivot, you can't make decisions without data, without proper data. And you got to collect that data. And Andrea referred earlier to the conversation of a lot of people are using paper still. It comes a time when if you're really going to transform your organization into the next phase of home care kind of growth, you have to be implementing technology so you can manage your data better. And by extension, you can create the business growth, you can pivot faster, you can see opportunities faster, you can see risk faster, and you can improve patient care quicker than you have been doing to date. So data is going to be very, very important to really make sure that your organization can win. And the only way that you're going to be able to drive that data conversation is defining those KPIs. Andrea mentioned earlier, what is it that you're tracking, right? From a financial health perspective, what are you tracking? Revenue management, what does that mean? Utilization management, what does that mean? Collection management, what does that mean? For your organization, do you have clear defined KPIs that your operations person and your different department managers are working towards? Is there a concentrated effort in your organization to ensure that your customer-centric data is being captured? What are those customer-centric data around case management, around intake, around nursing? So being able to drill down in what does scheduling look like? How long does it take to schedule new cases? When you get a case from an MLTC, what we call orphan cases, how long does it take you to activate that authorization? 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks? The idea is, what is the satisfaction level of your customer? You talk about nursing metric, visit management. What's the quality of the visit? Change in condition. How are you tracking changes in condition? Those are some of the big things when client gets hospitalized or clients have a fall. These things are critical to the health plan, the MLTCs. And at the end of the day, as I said earlier, the MLTCs are looking for the best agencies to work with. And the best agencies know their numbers, right? The best agencies know their KPIs. Their staff know what it is that the KPIs should be. And the staff are being held accountable for those KPIs. Similarly, talent-centric analysis, acquisition and onboarding, compliance, your compensation management, your staff management, your feedback management, your vendor and consultant management. Do you have metrics? Do you have KPIs that you are tracking to manage each of these elements of your talent experience? Digital transformation in organization is going to be critical. A lot of organizations for a while, there have been pushback from the state when it comes on to paper, digital documents. The state is a lot more open since COVID when it comes on to using digital options for your organization. And so digitizing those paper files is going to be a good way to start the process. Implementing systems, right? But before you start implementing system, understanding your processes, right? And we have a webinar coming up in January around digital transformation. So I will flip over to our next session, which is just talking about answering questions. I saw a hand up earlier, and I will allow that participant to ask her question. But overall, and I'm rushing through it a little bit because I want to get to the questions, it is important that all that we have spoken about today, that the only way that we're going to be able to achieve those things is if we strengthen our data management process and define our KPIs, right? So we collect the right data, or we collect the data in the right way, right? So if you have a system that don't have drop downs, right? And all you have is narration and everything is you got to write out. You can't run analysis in real time on a system like that. So you want to get systems that you can establish and search by unique variables that are going to drive your business forward. How long does it take to resolve the incident? How long does it take to resolve the fall? What type of clients are falling? When are your clients falling? Discharges are happening. What is causing the patient to leave your agency? What is causing the aide not to take shift? If you're not gathering that level of information, we cannot grow the business. And sometimes we think, I want revenue, right? I want revenue. But if you don't got systems, you can't sustain revenue. If you don't have systems in place, the revenue is going to come in and it's going to be left there unutilized, right? The revenue is going to come in and you're not going to have people to staff those cases. The revenue is going to come in and the client is not going to be happy. The aide is not going to be happy. Your case manager is not going to be happy. So really, strategy is not possible. Growth is not possible without customer experience, talent experience, and compliance, right? So we're going to just jump in some questions now. We have another 15 minutes or 13 minutes and just really get the ball rolling with some questions. I saw somebody had their hand up earlier, and I potentially could open the mic. So you could, I don't know if there's a mic feature, but you could type your question in the question box. There's one question that quality and consistent care are integral to a good reputation and healthy stream of revenue for home care agencies. What are some measures that can be taken to not only ensure that the workforce not only maintain, but also excel in their performance? And anybody can jump in. What are some of the measures that an organization can take that the workforce can excel in their performance?
So, Kevin, I'll start off with that. I think there's a few things that you can do that we touched upon a little bit here, right? So one is making sure that your workforce understands what quality of care is and what the expectations are of them. And that comes from clear communication in a multitude of ways, right? Whether that be, here's a weekly text message. Here's a message on your paycheck. When you come to the office, you see a poster reminding you to do X, Y, or Z. And it's also, I think, you can use technology to kind of guide them into what is expected of them, right? So, again, in today's day and age, just to jump out, you can't have it be so manual anymore. You have to give them the more technology you have and the stricter parameters of that technology, you're kind of channeling your caregivers into doing only what we want them to do and letting them know if they don't do that, there's simple issues in them finishing their duties for the day, right? So I think that it really is something that you kind of address from the top down strategically. This isn't something where you're just like, I told you I want you to do this, focus on this month, guys, and then leave it alone and hope that it works out the way that you want it to. It's really about consistent messaging in a variety of ways and using the resources that you have to guide them.
Makes sense. Thank you very much, Thomas. We have another question here. It says, what are some of the biggest risk and compliance activities that agents should be paying attention to ensure their survival? And maybe we could highlight, Emina, two of those big risks that agencies or compliance activities that agencies should pay attention to in 2023.
So there's two, right, that you wanted me to address. First one has to do with labor and employment, wage and hour issues. I still find a lot of agencies are not paying people correctly. And with the minimum wage going up and the reimbursement in many cases not necessarily keeping up with that, a lot of operators are kind of itching to cut corners on this side. So that's an area that needs to be monitored. And then separately, again, Medicaid integrity. You know, OMIC has been a little bit quiet over the last few years because of COVID, but they're back out there and they're pursuing a lot of these claims. To them, honestly, LICSAs seem like a foreign land still in many cases. You know, they're used to auditing nursing homes and other providers, but there are still a lot of issues when it comes to, again, the paperwork. You know, the assessment is not done on time. There were no employment verifications done, like simple things that are not new. And as I mentioned earlier, your claim and your ability to bill for a unit of service and the ability to keep that money is contingent on all these requirements. So you might have done 99 out of 100 things correctly, but if that assessment was not timely, or if one of the vaccinations was not on there, but everything else was done correctly, you got to pay that money back. So I don't think a lot of providers realize that. You know, it's not just one thing that you have to do correctly, it's everything. Otherwise, all that money you worked so hard to bill and get, it's gone.
No, makes sense. I think we'd love to kind of talk a little bit about some of the innovative revenue models that you see around, because clearly the traditional approach to waiting to having one line of business where it's LICSA providing home care services through HRA or through MLTC or private pay, it's definitely has done well for a lot of agencies. However, as time progresses and value base is here and competition has increased, how are organizations today creating new models, revenue models, to really drive their agencies and to set their agencies apart? Anybody can jump in with that.
Okay, I wasn't sure who you wanted. Well, I mean, my take on it is, if I was an operator, I'd go after it all. I would have a grant writer in-house or someone who's at least good at it. There are so many funding opportunities out there that can be utilized. So I would have someone constantly applying for different grants and setting up different programs. A lot can be done in the community under LICSA these days. So yeah, I wouldn't be stuck just doing PCA services. That's not survival. The only method of survival there is volume, and volume is very difficult to achieve. You either buy it or you build it with a lot of sweat and tears. So you have to have all these other sources of business. You can't just be the traditional PCA. Just my 2 cents.
Indeed. Anybody else on revenue models?
I guess there are kind of two approaches to this. One is what Emina said, which is diversify. The other is to get very boutique-like and really focus on one thing or the provision of one type of, I don't want to say special, but it could be specialty, right? And really work to make that your thing. And you may not make as much money as a high volume performer or provider, but you can do very well if you take that one thing and really be the best at it. So I think either approach, I think when folks stay in the middle, it's very hard for them to have the right staff and the amount of staff to deal with all of the compliance issues that the LICSA, if you are also trying to be an FI, if you're trying to be something else, you know, and you're middle of the road, there's just not enough revenue, there's just not enough money to make it work right. So if you're gonna go, you go hard, like what Emina just said, and you do a multitude of things, or conversely, you go to a very smaller, much smaller, high-end or singular specialized approach and work that to the max. Those are the two things that just immediately come to me with that question.
Okay, thanks. Thomas, as an operations person, I would imagine that you're looking at operational or operations models out there that are happening in different states. Is there any that you'd love to share with us that you think has been working for agencies or that you are looking to potentially adopt?
So I guess I'll say this. There's not like a, I would say, a different state model from what I work in New York that we do. I think that you are like operational models in different states are very different, and that kind of echoes a little bit what Andrea was talking about, what Emina was talking about. Like, you can't dip your toe into that and say, oh, maybe I'll expand over the border into another state and see how it is. Like, you've either got to go whole hog and say, like, I am ready, and you have to be ready for that, or you're not ready for that and stay and know where you are and be an expert in where you are. Because if you try and dabble and go, okay, I think we're ready to expand, let's take, let's see what we can do. The amount of resources that you need to run concurrent operations, regulatory, compliance wise in different states can sink you, right? It's not always an apples to apples thing. So moving from one state to another, I think is a very big jump. I think that what I would say is, if you are looking to expand your horizons, if you're saying, hey, we're really good here and we think we can be really good somewhere else, you really need to understand what that next step is. Are you Elixir that deals with MLTCs and you're trying to, I don't know, get into private pay business or whatever the case may be? What do you do well, and how can you take what you do well and flip it into somewhere else while keeping your internal costs down? That's the real operational decision that you need to make, and you need to understand before you take that step. Because what I've seen in my time and again is people have said, let me take all I can, let me eat my fill, and then their stomach bursts because they take on too much, and they kind of over mortgage themselves out, or they think that their infrastructure can handle the larger caseload that they're about to take on, and it can't. So you really want to make sure that you have, I don't mean to be cliche, but you have your ducks in a row and you really understand what you do and how you do it and what scaling up means before you take those steps.
Indeed, Thomas, it's interesting that a lot of organizations that expands over or expand their business in different markets usually do so through strategic alliances or through acquisitions, M&As. So you have a business in that area that is performing or underperforming that you can basically connect your brand to. And we've seen a lot of Elixirs from Texas and wherever else coming into New York through those types of acquisition. And to Andrea's point, niche play is definitely sometimes a good effort. But even within that niche play, the care management approach is going to be very, very integral, where you are now mapping in different service provisions. So nutrition, you're working with social workers, you're working with housing, you're working with different types of services, a VNS model, different types of services that organizations invariably, not only, but clients need, and be able to partner with the sources on both sides of the fence. So becoming a bridge, right? And then, as Emina said earlier, I mean, these things are where you're now able to go and write grants to say, hey, I want to be a bridge, but somebody got to pay for me being a bridge. And you talk about health disparity, you talk about access to care, you talk about different groups that don't really have access because of language barriers and cultural barriers. And CDPAP may be an option, but CDPAP may not be an option. And so it is really trying to figure out what makes sense for your organization. And oftentimes one size doesn't fit all. I mean, you have to kind of understand your appetite and your overall engagement to be able to determine what makes the best sense for you. One of the biggest things that I feel that organizations should be looking at is technology. How do you infuse a technology-enabled business? You want to get into private pay, but are you going to go at private pay where you got to talk to every person that needs care at the point of onboarding? Do you have a system that is managing the collection of money, managing the onboarding in terms of, I want these services, and setting it all up? And then your nurse goes out there. You don't need an intake person to do that, to manage that, because the system, in a sense, not replaces, but give you enough information so you can skip a step, as it were, because the client has helped with that step. And then additionally, one of the things that I've seen and I've been thinking about is creating technologies in homes that support the type of data that you're collecting from the home. So when a home care worker helps the client to get their medication, you don't know it, but now the home care worker can enter it right there. The medication was done. So that care plan be very active and alive. And so the home care worker is not just looking at a piece of paper that she have in her purse that she pulls away or he folded away and trying to figure out, how do I support this client? And some days they remember and some days they forget. And so if you want a certain type of behavior, then you got to kind of create a structure that forces it without forcing it. And so we have a lot to do in this industry, the home care industry, but I'll give my panelists 30 seconds just to say their last bit, and then we will wrap up. But thank you all for joining us. Panelists, your last bit, wrapping up on this conversation today.
Andrea, you're muted.
Yes, so my 30 seconds is I'm looking forward to 2023. There is a lot of work. We're all ready to help in any which way we can. The future is brighter, and right now it doesn't look so bright, but it is. It really is. And we can do this. We can do it well. We are poised. So that's my 30 seconds.
Emina?
I'm looking forward to 2023 as well. You know, attorneys love change because it's job security. So, but I'm used to it every year, right? Something new, something exciting. I'm looking forward to the budget with Howell now having been reelected. It will be interesting to see what she's going to do for New York State without the pressure of the campaign, right? We get to see the real Howell. So there's a lot to look forward to.
Nice. And Thomas?
My 30 seconds, Kevin, I like one of the last points you made. Technology and technology partnership is key for all the things that we're talking about. If you want to stay in compliance, if you want to get accurate data, if you want to drive performance and outcomes for your staff and your clients, you need to have technology that assists you. We cannot do this manually anymore. So if you're thinking about taking that leap to grade, this is the time. Perfect.
Thank you all for joining us today. As we panelists, you did a great job. Participants, you stayed on. That's great for the most part. We're having a webinar coming up on January 9th. Is your healthcare business digital enough? And this will kind of really delve into digital transformation, looking at how you map your customer experience, your talent journey, and how you drive your kind of overall innovation strategy in your organization, making process reengineering the driver of the technology investment that you make, right? Because oftentimes what we do, we invest in the technology and hope that it fits our systems. And that is kind of putting the cart before the horse. So I thank you for coming on, and I respect the time, and we look forward to seeing you on January 9th. Thank you very much.